Welcome to Subscription Prescription, the podcast where you get the information you need to scale your subscription program. Hello and welcome to another dose of Subscription Prescription. I'm your host, Matthew Holman. This is the podcast where we help you unlock everything related to D2C subscriptions. I'm excited today to be talking about financials. Namely, we're going to be decoding a lot of the different numbers that go into making a subscription business successful. I'm going to give you some insights on what you should be paying attention to, how you should think about them, and ultimately make sure that you're baking into your brand an obsession with metrics and numbers. And the reason I say this is because I've interviewed a lot of brands. I've talked to a lot of the big successful brands. And ultimately, as you grow, if you think about what a mature subscription business looks like, is you're really obsessed with understanding how profitable every customer is across different channels, across different products, so that you know exactly how much you can afford to invest in a channel. So for example, if you know if your affiliate program that people have an LTV of $150 and you're willing to, you know how much you can pay to acquire somebody through that affiliate program, right? If you know that on your website, the LTV for somebody is $120, right? You know how much you can afford to pay to acquire that person. So that's how, again, a lot of brands, it's very predictive. Like you put in something and you get out something, it becomes this formula that you can use to drive growth and understand the composition of your subscription program. But that being said, when we're growing, not everybody has a ton of time and resources to have a whole financial planner. Although if you're interested, I work with some really great FP&A. This is financial planning and analysis. People that can help you look at and model your brand. So if you're interested in getting anything like that or an introduction to one of the experts that I work with, again, these are people that have worked with some of the largest brands and smaller brands in the space. I'm happy to do that for you. So let's first start and understand that the basic concept of subscriptions is that we have what's essentially called a CAC to LTV ratio or a CAC to CLV ratio. What this essentially means is CAC, for those of you this is probably a term you're really familiar with, especially if you're engaged in paid ads. This is customer acquisition cost. So this is showing how much it costs to acquire a customer. And when you're growing, you can there's analytics tools out there like Triple Whale and others that allow you to get kind of a view of this. Even within your Shopify dashboard, you're going to see some of these numbers if they're going to be able to track like what you've been spending and see what how much you're paying to acquire a sale. And then as you get bigger, you can add like more in the weeds reporting. But for most brands, even up to like 10, 15 million in revenue, they're generally looking at what we call blended CAC. So this is basically taking, for the month of May, you take all the money that you spent on marketing, right? This could be money that you put into paid ads, money that you put into maybe some of like your SEO strategies. If you did a big content push, you could look at that total money spent, and then you have the number of orders that you got that month, and you're going to divide that into the dollar spent. You're going to get a blended acquisition cost. So basically the cost that it took you to get an order for that month, right? So again, that's a fairly simple concept in the sense of like what a lot of people are paying attention to, how they're thinking about it. Okay, so again, with CAC, we know that is the cost on average that it takes us to acquire a customer. From here, we're getting into customer lifetime value, right? You can call this LTV or CLV, customer lifetime value. This term is used in a few different ways. How we're going to define this initially is understanding the amount of revenue that each customer brings in. Ideally, the more accurate definition is the profitability you generate per customer, but we're going to talk about that as an additional concept. So customer lifetime value, or the amount of revenue that each customer generates, is something that you can track. Shopify has a great report for this where you can see like the average revenue per cohort under your reports. If you look at cohort segments, your subscription app or platform should have some kind of reporting here as well, but you're going to see a little bit of discrepancy because of how this is calculated. Not every platform is good at incorporating like the discounts that you used or that you're using to keep subscribers. So you do have to take a little bit of that with a grain of salt. And as you scale, you can add in other tools like Lifetimely, Peel. There's a new one that's coming out that's been growing called Ham, Sarah's Analytics. And there's a lot of other custom solutions you can build to kind of get a clearer view of this. But essentially, what you're trying to track is based off of this monthly cohort. So like, again, we were saying, we know the cost to acquire subscribers in May. We can look at all the revenue that is generated by customers that we acquired in May, right? We can do this from a store-wide perspective, including both one-time and subscriptions, or we can segment this a step further and just look at subscriptions specifically. So everybody that came in and bought something in May, if they get anything either through retention, like an email, or a subscription they buy in June, July, August, we're calculating the total revenue generated by all of those people that we get over time. And then we divide by the total number of people in that cohort to come up with an average, right? And the average gives us an insight into how much revenue the average person you acquired. And so what we can get out of that. So for example, let's say I just looked at this year. I looked at a January cohort. I've got the money that the January cohort spent in January, in February, in March, in April, and now into May. And let's say that's $200 on average, right? Which is pretty good. If I know that on average it costs me $60 based on that CAC number, then I now know that I spent $60 to acquire an average customer in January, and that the average customer in January has contributed $200 in average revenue, right? So what that number then gives us is a ratio that we can also use to gauge the overall health of our program, right? We now have a CAC to LTV ratio, right? And so 200 to 60 is going to be a little bit better than 3 to 1. It's going to be like 3.5 to 1. And that's a pretty healthy number. Actually, 3 to 1 is a really good baseline to get at. Once a lot of brands are closer to 2 to 1, or often 1.5 to 1 when you're trying to figure out a lot of different pieces of your business, which makes sense. If you're at 1 to 1 or less, you're losing money. That's kind of like the long and short of it, especially if we're looking at just from a revenue, not a profitability standpoint, you are losing money. Where we go a step further from this is that we're going to look at the amount of money that each of those customers are spending, or that we have to spend to get them that revenue. Another way of thinking about this is every month you have a subscription go out, there's a cost associated with that. So some of the things that I like to do, and I've been thinking about, I'll probably put like an LTV sheet that I've done in Google Sheets for some clients before that we can attach to this show in the show notes so that you can get that, is essentially start looking at, okay, if we know our average cost to acquire a customer, we should also know our average landed cost, right? So landed cost is the cost it took you to buy the product from your manufacturer and have it shipped in. And any other associated costs with getting it ready to be shipped. We also look at the cost to pick and pack that product, and then the average shipping cost to go out, right? So that's all the numbers that go into what cost looks like. So again, say we have a $100 average order value, say we're spending $50 on advertising or blended CAC for that customer. And then if we have, say the cost of goods sold, which is including our landed cost and pick and pack and shipping, all these things, let's say that's another $30, then we know that we have $20 of profitability on that first order. And then where the beauty part is, on the next order, the second month, we don't have to pay that $50 in CAC. We still have that $20 for landed cost. We now have $80 in margin that we can help pay for the business. Now, those numbers sound pretty good. I know that everybody out there would love to be acquiring initial subscribers at a profitable moment. A lot of you are not. I have a lot of other episodes where we talk about some of this balance of how you manage profitability or not, and how you kind of shoot for those things. But again, the way to think about this is coming up with a very simple model where you can understand, and I like looking at this, pulling numbers of number of subscribers. So when we're looking at our subscription platform, you're often looking at things in terms of percent retention. So like if I acquired 1,000 subscribers in January, I have 80% retention in February, 70% retention in March, and so on and so on. For purposes of like these number calculations, I like to look at them as actually the number. So, for example, we're looking at a January cohort where we have 1,000 subscribers, and let's say the average order value for that month was $50, and let's say the average customer acquisition cost for that month was $40, and let's say the average cost of goods sold, this is the landed cost and the shipping and all those things, is $20, right? So now I have a $60 cost to acquire that customer and get them the product, and I have a $50 revenue that I got for those people. And so again, what I like to look at in the subscription platform for understanding profitability is not looking at the percentages, but looking at the number that's in each cohort. So that 1,000 people, I now know that if I had 1,000 people and I have a $20 cost of goods sold and a $40 average CAC for the month, and a $50 average order value, I now know that I lost $10 per 1,000. So I'm $10,000 in the hole for that cohort, right? But month 2, and again, this is where it helps to model this in a little bit of a Google Sheet or an Excel file, is, okay, looking in the subscription platform, how many subscribers do I have in February from that January cohort? Let's say I now have 800. So let's say I lost 20%. So I now have 800 people that are ordering from me again, right? My cost of goods sold for those people is still $20. I now have, based on a $50 average order value, $30 per subscriber in contribution margin now, or profitability, because I'm not paying for the cost to acquire those customers anymore. And if I have 800 left and I have $30 in profitability, I now know that I made $24,000 in profit, and that offsets the $10,000 I lost in month 1. So I now know I have $14,000 in profit in month 2. And then I can model that out into month 3. How many people did I keep? Month 4, how many people did I keep? Yeah, the longer I talk about this, I need to share my Google Sheet. So I'll put that in the show notes. We'll definitely do that for you so that you can see a very simple way to model this. And what I like to put in is you can put in historical data for the amount of people you've kept, and you can pull average order value either from your subscription platform or from Shopify to look at these numbers, because you want to be able to get at understanding your profitability for each cohort. Now, where this can get additional nuance is we can start breaking this out by channel. So I can look at, like, say, affiliates, looking at discount codes, potentially looking at through whether I acquired somebody through Google or through Meta or through a different channel, as well as by products, right? If I want to identify, go a little, even another layer deeper and looking at, hey, I've got 5 different SKUs that sell a lot. I want to understand, based off my average customer acquisition cost and the landed cost for each of those products and the order value of those products, I'd like to understand which customer is more profitable. Because at first glance, it's really easy to think that the product you have the best margin on is going to be the one that's the most profitable for you. But you have to look at retention. So this becomes a time series as we're looking at this over time, because even the product that has the best margin to it might not retain as well as products that don't have as good of margin. But because people stay on that product longer, customers that buy that product end up contributing more profit to your business, if that makes sense. Okay, now, so when we're thinking about all these numbers and all these metrics and all these sheets and all these things, I do like to kind of suggest thinking about lifetime value as bound by some kind of time limit, right? Because it's really easy to see that, like, a cohort that you acquired like a year ago, on average, you're going to have higher LTV than a cohort you acquired 3 months ago, because even if there's only 10 people left in that cohort, they're still spending more money, which is slowly driving up the average. So I like to look at things typically based on the brand at a 90, 120, or maybe even 180 day LTV. So we're talking about 3 to 4, or maybe 6 months. And the reason I say it depends is if you have a lot of like quarterly subscriptions, then a 3-month or 90-day LTV mark typically doesn't make sense. You should look at adding like an extra month. So like a 120-day or even 150-day LTV might make sense. But if you're doing like monthly subscriptions, looking at 90-day LTV makes a lot of sense, and I'm going to explain why. The bulk of your revenue is going to be coming in those first few months because you're losing subscribers, right? So that's kind of one of the biggest things. And then the second reason is because when you're making adjustments and changes within your program, it's really difficult to see how that's going to impact like LTV at the 8-month mark when you're running a test like last week, right? So starting to pay attention to like 30, 60, 90 LTV to see how well you're performing, how well you're keeping people is a great way to start measuring like, hey, how is this month compared to last month cohort, or how is a cohort from 2 months ago performing to a cohort 4 months ago, because we've been making these changes and tests in our cancellation portal. The other really, really big caveat I want to point out here, and one of the limitations with analytics within most subscription apps, is that they are showing you people that haven't canceled. While a lot of them do have this report, it's out more now. This is where you want to actually start looking at people that have had an order that processed, right? Because if that earlier example when I said you had 1,000 subscribers and maybe we have 800 left, that is assuming that all 800 placed an order, right? So it's better to look at how many orders were placed by that cohort in a given month when you're calculating like your profitability for that month. Otherwise, it's not going to be quite as accurate. And when we're looking at retention cohort tables in subscription apps, you want to make sure you're toggling to, again, I like the counts where we're looking at the count of orders for that month from that cohort. So if we had 1,000 people or 1,000 subscriptions that came in, but it's really only 750 orders that happen in the next month, and then 650 orders instead of like, say, like 800 or 700 because those people hadn't canceled, they had skipped, if that makes sense. And again, the whole purpose of a lot of this is trying to think through how we can set North Star metrics. And so when we're thinking about profitability, ultimately that should be your goal. It's looking at different ways to understand the profitability of cohorts you're acquiring. Whether this is store-wide or at just the subscriber level, looking at how much profit they're driving back to your business. Because if you just look at revenue, you're potentially going to make a lot of mistakes with how you're building the business. And I've talked about this on past doses where we're thinking about, is it more impactful to drive a higher average order value because of how much money we acquire up front, although that might lend itself to higher churn initially? Or is it, if we don't push for a high enough AOV, it takes us 5 months to make that cohort profitable instead of 3 months or 2 months? These are some of the questions that you're trying to drive for. I would say that as a general rule, it's really great to get that cohort profitable under 3 months. If you're past 3 months, you're in a very dangerous place because things could go against you very, very easily. You could change something in the program and not see it for several months, and then the business is incredibly unprofitable. I really like to try to shoot for first order or first renewal profitability if we can get to that point, because then we know that a lot of the subscribers we have after that fact are going to be profitable and are going to be the main reasons why we are able to grow and scale our business. So think about that. Keep that in mind. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. Again, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Be happy to jump on a call to go over metrics, especially based on the different tech stacks that people are using and what you're looking at. Sometimes this stuff can be a little bit confusing or all over the place. But sometimes it's good just to be able to own that data and do periodic checks to understand the profitability and health of your business. And I will end by saying those are the kind of numbers that a great ad buying team should be either creating for you or asking you for, right? They're going to want to be able to say, hey, based off of numbers that we're looking at, your 30-day or your 90-day LTV is $200. The profitability for that is like $80. We're only spending, we can afford to spend another $30, $40, $50 on CAC to get more people like this, and you're still going to be making money in the short term as well as the long term. Okay, that's it for this week's dose. Again, make sure that you check the show notes for any comments or questions. And also, I'll have a Google Sheet with a little bit of ways that you can model by putting these numbers in to make it a little bit easier for you to see that. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or feel free to drop a comment on the show. That's it for this week's dose. Stay tuned for next week when we will dive once again into the world of subscriptions. That's it for today. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe so that you can get notified when new episodes come out each week on Tuesdays.